At 89, Robert Redford's ex-wife finally broke her silence, and what she revealed changed everything Hollywood thought it knew about him and about Paul Newman. For half a century, they were the perfect pair. Butch and Sundance, charm and mystery, to legends whose chemistry defined an era. But behind the laughter, the races, and the red carpets, there was a story no one dared to tell. A story of devotion, of jealousy, and of a secret that may have followed them to the grave. It all began in 1969. Hollywood was still the land of the studio kings. Big budgets, bigger egos, and even bigger secrets. Paul Newman was already an icon, his name carved in silver. Robert Redford was the new face, a rising actor, magnetic, but untested. When 20th Century Fox prepared Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, the studio wanted Steve McQueen or Marlon Brando. But Newman, against every producer's wish, refused. He looked at the script, then at a photo of Redford, and said quietly, "Only Bob can play Sundance." That single decision would bind the two men together for the rest of their lives. The film exploded. Critics called it lightning in a bottle. Audiences fell in love, not only with the outlaws on screen, but with the effortless connection between the two stars. One, a friendship to perfect. Behind the camera, it wasn't just work. They finished each other's lines, shared the same jokes, the same silences. Crew members whispered that Newman would wait for Redford on set long after his own scenes were done, just to watch him perform. When the director yelled, "Cut!" the two often disappeared together, talking in low voices by the trailers until midnight. It was a friendship so close that even their families blended. They bought homes only a mile apart in Connecticut. Children called him Uncle Bob. Neighbors would see the two men working on cars in the driveway, laughing like brothers. Or maybe something deeper. Rumors began to swirl. Paparazzi caught them dining alone at small restaurants long after midnight. They arrived at premieres together, left together, and refused to speak about their private lives. To the world, it was the ultimate Hollywood friendship. But for those who looked closer, there was a spark that no camera could fully capture. And then, as one woman later confessed, that spark would soon ignite a fire that destroyed her marriage and exposed Hollywood's most secret bond. 2 years later, when the cameras had faded and the crowds stopped cheering, Robert Redford's ex-wife could no longer keep silent. In an interview recorded in her quiet Connecticut home, her voice trembled, but her words cut deep. "People saw a friendship," she said softly. "But I saw something else, something no one was ready to believe." She spoke of nights when Redford disappeared without a word, of phone calls whispered behind closed doors, of gifts wrapped not for her, but for another man. New watches, handwritten notes, rare paintings, all sent to one address, Paul Newman's. At first, she told herself it was just admiration, one actor respecting another, but as months passed, that admiration began to devour everything. According to her, Redford had forced the entire family to move from New York to a quiet house in Connecticut, just a mile from Newman's home. He said it was for the kids, but she knew better. Every evening when the lights in Newman's mansion glowed through the trees, Redford would disappear into the night, saying only, "Don't wait up." She waited anyway. Hours later, she'd hear the sound of his car, the smell of Newman's cologne still hanging in the air. Sometimes, she said, she could hear laughter, muffled, distant, echoing through the cold walls of their home. It wasn't the laughter of two men sharing jokes. It was something softer and far more dangerous. "I asked him one night," she whispered, "Do you love him more than you love me?" He didn't shout. He didn't deny it. He just looked at me and smiled sadly. That smile, she said, was the beginning of the end. Arguments erupted like storms. Doors slammed. Glass shattered. Words turned into weapons. Yet through every fight, every tear, Redford always returned to one place: Paul's side. Reporters often spotted them together at racetracks, at charity galas, at small diners, long after midnight. They laughed the same, dressed the same, even moved in sync like mirrored reflections. And for the first time, Hollywood began to whisper not about their fame, but about what bound them so tightly. Some said it was loyalty, others love. Behind the perfect photos, behind the charm that lit up the screen, was a story written in silence, a story the world wasn't allowed to read. Then came the breaking point. On a stormy night in 1985, as thunder rolled over the Connecticut hills, she finally demanded the truth. "Choose," she told him. Me or Paul? For a long moment, there was only the sound of rain against the window. Redford stared into the fire, a glass of whiskey trembling in his hand. And then he spoke a single word, Paul. That one name shattered everything. He chose his friend, or perhaps his forbidden love. And with that choice, the marriage ended quietly on paper, but violently in her heart. Years later, she would say, I stopped being his wife the moment he chose Paul. The rest was just silence. But for Redford and Newman, that silence was only the beginning of a bond that would outlive them both. The legend in exile. After the divorce, Robert Redford disappeared from the spotlight to the public. It looked like peace, a man retreating to nature after conquering Hollywood. But those who truly knew him whispered a different story. He wasn't chasing peace. He was running from ghosts. His mansion in Connecticut grew quiet. The laughter of children that once filled the halls was gone. In the study, the walls were lined with film posters, Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. The Sting, Jeremiah Johnson, every one of them a memory. And on every shelf somewhere, Paul Newman's smile looked back at him. Lola's presence had vanished, yet Paul somehow remained. Redford buried himself in work. He accepted every challenge Hollywood offered, producing, directing, acting in stories of loss, rebellion, and redemption. In 1980, he directed Ordinary People, the quiet tragedy of a family. Broken from the inside, and won the Academy Award when reporters congratulated him. They said he looked proud, but the camera captured something else in his eyes, emptiness. Later that night, he told a friend, fame is an empty house when you can't share it with someone you trust. He went on to star in All the President's Men, The Natural, Out of Africa, movies that made him a legend. Yet, in every interview, when asked about success, his words were always cautious, as if success were a weight, not a gift. Success, he once said quietly, is just noise. The quiet, that's what kills you. That quiet haunted him the most in the winters. The house in Connecticut, wrapped in snow, seemed frozen in time. Friends recalled visiting and finding him outside, sitting on the porch with a cup of coffee, staring at the forest where Newman's home used to glow in the distance. Sometimes he'd nod at the trees and whisper, I still see the lights. When work could no longer distract him, Redford built something new, the Sundance Institute. He told the press it was a haven for young filmmakers, a place to nurture new voices. But to those close to him, it was more than that. I built it to escape, he confessed once. And to remember what? No one dared to ask. Each year during the Sundance Festival, people would spot him walking alone at dawn. The mountains behind him burned orange in the morning sun, and for a fleeting second he'd smile, a small, private smile, as if hearing a voice only he could recognize. He mentored students, discovered new directors, helped shape the future of cinema, but he never let anyone get too close. He'd praised their work, share advice, then withdraw into silence, vanishing into the Utah mountains before nightfall. One former Sundance student recalled asking him, Mr. Redford, what keeps you going after all these years? He paused, looked at the horizon, and said, the hope that one day the past will stop chasing me. In that moment, the young man thought he saw tears in Redford's eyes. But Redford turned away before anyone could be sure. Through the 1980s and 90s, his fame only grew. He was adored, respected, almost untouchable. Yet, people who worked with him described a loneliness that never left. He often finished shooting days by staying alone on set long after everyone else had gone home. Sitting under the studio lights, waiting, when asked why, he smiled faintly. Old habits die hard. I'm still waiting for someone to walk out of the shadows and say, hey, Sundance, we've got work to do. Redford's legacy was built on independence, discipline, and silence. But beneath all of that was longing, a longing for something pure, unspoken, untamed. In interviews, he often defended the power of privacy. He said the world didn't need to know everything about its heroes, but perhaps he was protecting not Hollywood's secrets, only his own. And even as decades passed, one thing never changed. In every photo of Robert Redford, even at 80, there was a shadow behind the smile. The echo of another face, another name, another time. For final scenes of friendship and love. Meanwhile, far from the Utah mountains, Paul Newman was living a quieter, steadier life. He had everything the public admired. A devoted wife, 6 children, racing trophies, charities that bore his name. To outsiders, he was the picture of contentment. But those who knew him closely said that whenever Robert Redford's name came up, his blue eyes softened. His grin lingered a little longer than usual. In one rare interview in the early 2000s, Newman laughed when asked who his favorite screen partner was. "I'll never find a partner who makes me laugh." "Like Bob does," he said, half joking, half wistful, and for a brief second, the room fell silent. Reporters didn't know what to make of that answer, but for those who had been there during the sting, they understood the second act. In 1973, 4 years after Butch Cassidy, Redford and Newman reunited for the sting. Hollywood expected a hit. What it got was lightning twice in the same bottle. Their chemistry was sharper, their timing effortless, as if for years apart had only deepened their rhythm. Behind the scenes, the crew said the two men were inseparable. They ate lunch together, rehearsed together, and often stayed after filming just to talk about everything but work. One assistant recalled catching them late one night on set, sitting under a single light, sharing a cigarette in silence. No words, just a look. "It felt like watching two old souls who didn't need language," he said. On Newman's dressing room door, Redford had taped a small sign that read, "Sundance was here." In return, Newman scribbled on a napkin, "Don't be late, kid. The con's not over yet." Those small pranks, the laughter, the inside jokes, they weren't just camaraderie, they were codes. Memories built between two men who understood that what they had was rare and fragile. The film went on to win 7 Oscars. The studio begged them to do a third movie together. Both agreed, but the project never materialized. Schedules clashed, timing failed. And perhaps deep down, both knew that lightning doesn't strike 3 times. Hollywood waited for their reunion. A critic once wrote, "It never came." Perhaps some stories, years of distance through the 80s and 90s, life carried them on separate paths. Newman toward philanthropy and racing, Redford toward directing, yet their lives never drifted far. When one appeared at a charity gala, the other's name was never far behind. Awards came with flowers, signed only from your old partner in crime. At public reunions, award shows, brief interviews, their smiles hid something deeper. The quiet ache of two men who had once shared everything but could never go back. As one reporter said, they were like parallel lines, always close, never touching. When time stood still, in 2007, Newman was diagnosed with cancer. Redford was in Utah when the call came. He said nothing, packed a bag, and whispered, "I have to see my friend." From then on, he was by Newman's side, reading, laughing, or simply sitting in silence. A nurse later recalled, "They didn't need words. It was like watching 2 parts of one life reconnect." "In those final days," Redford murmured, "you're the best part of my life, Paul." Newman smiled faintly. "You always were my Sundance." The light fades. When Newman died in 2008, Redford didn't attend the funeral. He only said, "I lost a true friend, the closest relationship of my life." Then he disappeared from public view. Friends noticed he carried a silver watch, Newman's gift, and kept on his desk a photo of them laughing on the Butch Cassidy set. When asked why he never put it away, he said, "Because some people don't leave. They just change rooms." Their story could have ended there, one gone, one left behind. But fate still had one final scene waiting for Robert Redford. 5, The Last Goodbye. When Paul Newman died in 2008, something in Robert Redford went silent. It wasn't just grief. It was as if the world had lost its sound. For weeks, he refused all calls, tributes, and interviews. When he finally spoke, it was only one line. "I lost a true friend, the closest relationship of my life." Those who knew him said it wasn't a statement. It was a confession. Years of silence. After the funeral, Redford withdrew to his ranch in Utah. No red carpets, no interviews, just mountains, wind, and memories. On his mantle sat a photo from Butch Cassidy and a silver watch engraved PN. Every morning, he'd wind it once, then set it back in place. When asked why he never remarried, he smiled. When you've already found the person who truly sees you, why pretend again? The final interviews. Years later, when he finally reappeared, the world saw an older man, silver hair, steady eyes, still carrying both sunlight and sorrow. Asked on the BBC who he'd bring back for a day, he laughed softly. "Paul, we still had things to talk about." Then quietly, "You can't replace that. You just carry it." It was the last time he spoke Newman's name in public. The mountain years. In his 80s, Redford spent his days painting and walking through the snow. When a neighbor once saw him photographing a storm, he said, "The light." Paul used to chase this kind of light. He called the photo "The Last Scene," the last night, September 24th, 2025. A quiet evening at Sundance. He wrote a final line in his notebook. "Endings are just places where we wait to meet again." He passed away that night peacefully, holding an old Polaroid of Paul smiling in the sun. He was 89 years old. The world mourned. Tributes poured in. Among them, one message from the Newman family read, "He and Dad are probably planning another con together somewhere above the clouds." Weeks later, a journalist found the silver watch still ticking beside the photo. He wrote, "It was as if one heartbeat had been waiting for another beyond the reel of life." In the end, that was their greatest story. No script, no camera, no audience. Just two souls forever bound by light, laughter, and love that never needed to be explained. 6. Legacy of silence. For decades, Hollywood has told us what love should look like. Perfect, scripted, camera-ready. But the truest love stories aren't filmed. They live quietly behind the scenes between action and cut. Robert Redford and Paul Newman never called it love. They didn't have to. The world already felt it in their glances, their laughter, and the silences that spoke louder than words. Brotherhood, partnership, devotion. None of those words were enough. In a world built on illusion, they found something real. And that's why their story still lingers. Because deep down, we all wanted to believe it wasn't just acting. When people remember Hollywood's golden age, they talk about beauty and fame, but few mention the loneliness behind the spotlight, the ache of being adored by millions, yet known by no one. Redford and Newman understood that loneliness. They carried it, transformed it, and turned it into something eternal. A love that needed no name. Their legacy isn't in the films or the awards, but in what they proved. That connection doesn't need definition. That silence can say everything. And that some hearts never stop searching, even after the applause fades. The true ending. Both men are gone now, yet their presence remains in late-night reruns. In the light that young actors still chase, in every reel that flickers to life in the dark. Perhaps that's what immortality really is, a conversation that never ends. Every time Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid plays, we meet them again. Two dreamers, two souls who refuse to be tamed, and maybe that's how they stay alive, through the stories we keep telling. So, what do you believe? Was it brotherhood, or something Hollywood could never name? Maybe it doesn't matter. Maybe what matters is that for one brief moment, two human beings found something true in a world built on pretending. And if that isn't love, then what?